Good evening, everyone. Sounds like there was a fire alarm at Common Space, so we are going to give the full couple minutes to get everyone settled in before we dive in tonight. We ready to start a 3-day project?
Yes.
Chat app is some of our TA's favorites. It's a lot of light bulb moments, which is nice.
And Max, did you put up yesterday's class on YouTube already?
Oh, did it not automatically post?
I didn't see it when I checked earlier.
Oh, let me check. C5 week 14 day 1. Yeah, it's there. I'll post the link in the Zoom chat for you.
Thank you.
Jen, we are officially done with Owen.
Wow.
I didn't realize how big of an Owen Wilson fan I was until yesterday when like all of the movie clips that came up, I'm like, oh, I know what movie that's from. I know what movie that's from. I know what movie that's from. And I'm like, oh God. It was not a good sign when I'm like, wait, why does the movie clip not match the title? And then I'm like, wait, why do I know that? I shouldn't know that. So chat this week and next week we will do blog and then we will be good to go and start on back end the week after next. Brandy, not to put you on the spot, but are you at Common Space, the fire alarm kerfuffle end?
I am not down there yet.
Okay.
I'm getting down there, but I'm not down there yet.
Okay, no problem. Thanks. Allie, no reason to be scared of back end. I much prefer back end to front end. And I realized yesterday that React is my least favorite thing to teach, but my most favorite thing to use. And I think I came to the realization that I don't like teaching React because React was probably the hardest thing for me to learn and the most satisfying thing for me to use. So because it was hard for me to learn it, I tend to be a better teacher for things that I learn better, if that makes sense at all. And React was, I remember thinking this should be easier to use, right? Like, I don't get, why do we have to use set state? Why can't we just update the variables? And tonight we're gonna, or probably tomorrow, we're gonna get into parent-children components and where the state lies. And we're gonna have to pass some data around. And it just seems very cumbersome to do that. But then once you get in the hang of it, you start realizing how nice state is that you can update it in one place and just have it do the right thing in your HTML. So I do promise that it is all worth it. But I really like the back end because while we're adding layers of complexity, all of those layers tend to make a lot more sense and tend to be a lot more logical. So I think React is hard to learn, but very much worth it. Trust me, if I didn't think it was worth learning React professionally, it would not be still part of our curriculum. So it is worth it. We get 2 more big projects with it before it goes anywhere. So that is definitely worth considering. Palash, Vistaprint is definitely the site that I recommended in the blog post. They seem to have gotten more expensive. But if you order like 500 cards at once, it tends to be more worth the price. Another very high-end one is called Moo, M-O-O. I think they used to be British, but have now expanded. Those are really high quality cards, but even more expensive than Vistaprint. And then I've been pleasantly surprised not only at Staples' quality, but also their turnaround time. So if you need something by like tomorrow or 2 days, you can get pretty good quality at Staples. You can print them on your printer. Yeah, I would try and avoid it if you can. I don't think it's really worth it to print your own. But I like Vistaprint. I've been surprised by Staples. And Moo is like really high end if you really want to stick out. Oh, and check out coupon sites for Vistaprint. Vistaprint always has coupon codes, but you have to try like 2 or 3 of them to find whatever the best deal is for yourself. But you can save a good 20-30% if you find the right coupon code.
Yeah, I built mine in Canva too, but I'm not sure like how many of them I'm gonna get them. I'm not really married to that design, so I'm gonna change them after like 100 cards or so.
Sure. It is, as soon as you get your business cards, you already find tweaks of what you want to do to the next ones. Although I'm not a fan of printing them yourself, I do recommend printing them out and just looking at it in actual size, because you'll find like, oh, I didn't think the text would actually be that small, or oh, it turns out I thought these things were centered, but once I printed it out, it's easier to see that on paper. So before you place an order of them, I do recommend printing them actual size.
Thank you.
Jen, not a stupid question. Jen's question was, has everything we've been working with is front end, and that actually came up in one-on-one today. Yes, with an asterisk. So everything we're doing is front end. The only thing that is kind of back end, but not really back end, is we've been working with back end APIs. So Owen Wilson is a back end API. New York Times is a back end API. We're going to do a weather project at some point. That will be a backend API, but we aren't actually building those APIs. So while we are using a backend, we are not building a backend. And so that is after next week, we will cross that line and officially learn backend databases, APIs, and servers, and all of that will be backend.
So the front end is when we're building stuff that is user interface, and the back end is when we build stuff that people aren't touching.
Correct.
Okay. That's what I thought it was, but I was like, wait a second, what? All right.
And we do have networking events coming up next week. On Wednesday is the Erie 21 networking event, and then on Thursday is happy hour. So class is canceled next Wednesday and Thursday, which means we really got to move on it for our last couple days of React. But today, even if you order today, Vistaprint might be tight to get business cards. It will not be the end of the world if you don't have business cards for that event. We are trying to get a directory website together so people can find you. You will not need resumes for that event, but you may meet someone there, and being able to have that follow-up is very good. I linked to the business card scene in American Psycho, where they're comparing like bone to other colors of white. And like little different fonts on their business card, and they all look identical, but they're all going and comparing it. So that is, I wouldn't go that extreme. There's another little YouTube clip. Sorry, I'm stalling because I'm trying to get the people at Common Space not to fall behind. Let me see if I can find I forgot that this clip even existed, and I really should have linked it in the blog post. And then I promise after this clip, we will get going in code. Let me share sign.
What if you could do SEO smarter and faster? With Wix, you can edit your meta tag.
And if you want to send them over to me to review anything, that's totally fine. But highly recommend that you get them, especially in Syracuse being a smaller city. Everyone knows everyone. Networking is very important. I did see a couple of you guys have posted about digital business cards. While it's great to have that as a backup, if you're at a networking event and someone asks you for a card, and you go, well, I've got a digital one, they may give you a kind of a funny look. The downside to a digital business card is that while they'll open it on their phone and they'll have that information, then they go to another tab on their phone or they go to load a website and your card is gone, right? And if they go and follow up with you the next day, they lost that link or they forgot to hit the save button or whatever happens, and then they can't get in touch with you, right? Compared to that physical paper business card, what's going to happen? They're going to get home at the end of the day. They're going to throw the stuff down on their office desk. They're going to sit down the next day and see that card, and they're going to make a conscious decision. Do I reach out to this person? Do I find them on LinkedIn? Do I connect with them? Or am I just going to toss the card? But because they have that card, they have to think about you that next day or the next time they see that card and say, am I going to reach out to that person? Am I going to network with that person? Or am I just going to toss it, right? Compared to the digital business card, where they may want to actually reach out to you, they may want to follow up with you, but because they didn't realize what tab they had open on their phone, they're going to move on to the next thing, and they're going to lose that and not be able to find it again. So things to think about. On next Tuesday, Laura will be coming in for a Q&A on any networking tips. So make sure to watch the career module for networking before next Tuesday if you haven't already in Canvas. That would be a really good weekend homework assignment if you have not done it yet. I think the video clip is only about 45 minutes. Laura does a great job on covering networking, and then she will be here on Tuesday, kind of in the guest speaker slot, to answer any questions that you guys have about networking, because these next two upcoming events are really important. I've stalled long enough. I see our common space students are with us. So glad you guys got back into the building and all of that stuff. Mo posted a link to a blog about the 5 steps to starting a conversation. I have not read that, but I will make sure to put that on my reading list and I will check that out. Thank you, Mo, for sharing that.
It's super helpful. I used to be in sales for a long time. So I don't know if you've ever been in a Walmart in the city and seen those people selling cable. I used to train those people. And you just got to start cold conversation. It really helps, you know. So if you walk to see somebody, the first thing I would say personally is like I would mention something on a person. But, oh, yeah, my uncle got those shoes. That's obviously not true. But, you know what I'm saying? You might want to be a little truthful in networking, but the stuff like that, it breaks down barriers. When you get like confused on how to conversate with people, you just start asking them about themselves. People love to talk about themselves, every single person. And they get personal, you get personal, and then, you know, you got a relationship. Network will put you in rooms that an education or degree would never put you in.
Absolutely. And I would not be here teaching today if I was not networking, right? And that's why the hackathons that Hack Upstate put on were great, because it was like I was there, I built a project, I got connected to Jesse, and then a year or two later, after my first Hack Upstate hackathon, it was like, oh, we're starting this Careers in Code boot camp and we're looking for teachers, right? And I never would have known that without getting out and networking. So very important. To your first impression is probably the most important thing. Your business card is going to allow them to follow up with you, which is why they are important. But just getting out there and realizing that you're not there networking to just get a job. You're there to meet people, to learn about roles, to see what is out in the community. There are companies that I've learned about that I didn't even know existed in Syracuse and only know about because of networking. Things about learning about what people do, and to Mo's point, right? Just being like, so what do you do? What's a 9-to-5 look like for you? What's something that you like about your job, right? Those are all really interesting questions. Mel posted over 70% of jobs come from networking. I've heard even higher, but there is some questionability around what that number actually is. I think LinkedIn says it's 80%. But anyway, it's a very high number of jobs come from networking, who you know, people sharing job links internally, people wanting to work with people that they are friends with. That all feeds into that. All right, we ready to dive into React? We've got 2 more chances to create a new project from scratch. We are going to go to everyone's favorite, the terminal, to get started tonight because we are starting from scratch. Tomorrow, because we are not starting from scratch, we will go through the process of duplicating and deleting node modules and all of that. So you will get more practice with that flow one more time. But because we are starting from scratch tonight, we are going to head over to the terminal. So I am headed to the terminal, command space, type in TER and hit enter. That is going to dump me out in my home folder. And if I run pwd, that will show me that I am in my home folder, my user folder. But to save some time, I'm going to head to Finder. I'm going to head to my desktop. I'm going to head to my code. I'm going to head to week 14. And just to show you that we can do this a couple different ways, I'm going to create a new folder called D2. I'm going to go over to my terminal, type in CD for change directory, and hit space. Do not forget the space, CD space, and then I can grab my day 2 folder and drag it into the terminal. If yours happens to be wrapping onto the next line, don't worry about it. Go ahead and hit enter. That changed me to day 2, but to prove I'm in day 2, I can do a PWD. If your PWD does not show you in day 2, you did your CD wrong, you did your drag and drop wrong. We always want, before we create any new files, before we create a new project, we want to check our PWD to make sure we are where we think we are. Otherwise, you're going to run into problems with folders in places you don't expect. Once we do our PWD, we are now in the right spot. Does anyone need help getting into the right folder? Good. Okay. npx create React app, and we are going to call this app chat. And while that's taken a minute to think, we can switch back over to Finder, click into the chat folder here, and drag and drop that sucker into VS Code.
I clicked enter and it's not doing anything.
On the create React app command, go ahead and share screen. Well, that's interesting. Okay. I don't think you did anything wrong, but let's see if this fixes it. So Control C will tell any command to stop. And then we're going to try that command again. Is anyone else running into issues with their create React app not working? Interesting. Let's try the good old turn it off and turn it back on. That's really strange. All right, let me try a backup here for you. All right, we are going to try it with V. npm create V. It looks like your npm is throwing a little fit because npm isn't even responding to commands. Sequota, can you try rebooting your computer and coming back? Because I'm not quite sure. PM version? PM update? npm appears to be fine. Just call it messages and see. Okay, one last thing I can try, and if this doesn't work, give it a reboot And if not, we'll just duplicate another project and just take it over. But I'm not really sure. Nothing there. Nothing there. And nothing there. Yeah, give it a reboot and then try and rerun that command, see if that fixes it. And if not, just raise your hand and I'll try and help you out.
Okay.
Sorry about that. Oh, Amberlynn, that's good to know. So after the reboot, if it's not working for Sequoia, we'll just leave it run for a minute and see if the gunk cleans out of the tubes. Anyone else have issues getting npx create react apt?
I didn't have an issue with that, but why do I always get this file is not displayed in the text editor because it is a directory when I drag and drop the file into Visual Code?
Do you drop the folder or do you drop this folder?
No, I dropped A2 in there.
That's probably why. I dropped chat in, and then whatever tab is open, you can just close it and then open app.js and it will probably go away.
Okay, thanks.
So we are going to get our React project started. So I am going to right click, package.json is a safe one. Really anything inside the chat folder is what you want to right click on, not something on in day 2. So right click on anything in the chat folder, go to open an integrated terminal. We're going to npm start up here. That is going to give me my spinning React logo and a bunch of warnings because React loves the drama. But once we get our spinning React logo, we can delete out the header and delete out the logo and head to our app.css and delete out app.css. That should leave us with a blank screen. And finally, I am going to start my live share and drop that in the chat. Natasha, do you need steps repeated? 3 things we're cleaning out: app.js. We are deleting out the header. So app.js is almost empty. We leave the div here. We go to app.css and we delete out everything in there. So that's a blank file. We also delete out the import on the first line of app.js because we don't need the logo. And then we also, in our terminal, we right click on app.js, we open an integrated terminal, and then we run the command npm start and hit enter. And that should either give you some yellow text in the terminal or give you a compiled successfully. Either way, once you get all of that cleared out, you should have localhost 3000 open with a just a blank screen. And that means we are good to get started on our chat application.
So Doug and I went on a bit of a scavenger hunt because every time I opened a new React project, it told me that it was already running. And I got a bad habit of just like closing the laptop and not stopping the programs before I shut down for the night. So I don't know if your code is somewhere still lingering in the background, but it keeps asking me if I want to work on another local host. So I guess I'm going to do that.
That's fine for now. If you log out or shut down the computer, it will kill anything running in the background and anything lingering. So a logout or a shutdown is a good way to clear out any servers running. But for now, until we get into the back end, it's totally fine to run it on another port.
Okay, thank you.
Create React app, Sequoia, create dash React dash app chat. And Amber Lynn mentioned that hers was acting funky yesterday and she just let it run for a minute and then it finally eventually went through. So I would give it a try, let it simmer for a minute, and if it still isn't doing anything, let me know. I've got a backup.
It's working now.
Yay. Okay.
Once it does this, how do I get it to,
Open the folder in VS Code.
yep,
Right click on any of the files over here and open an integrated terminal. npm start in the terminal and hit enter. And then in app.js, we delete out the entire header. We delete out the import for the logo. And in app.css, we just delete everything in that file.
okay, so am I dragging day 2 or am I dragging the terminal into?
You should drag the chat folder inside day 2.
Okay. I don't think I'm understanding. So the terminal box, I'm dragging,
From Finder, you're going to go to week 14, day 2, grab the chat folder that got created, and this is the folder that you're dragging into VS Code.
okay, gotcha. Thank you.
And app.css, yes, Natasha, we're just deleting all the contents in it, but not deleting the file itself so that we can use it down the line if we want. Give everyone just one more minute there, and then we will dive in. Anyone else need help getting it started? Anyone else not have a blank local host? Okay, so let's talk about what we're building. We are going to build a little chat app, and it's not actually going to work, right? We're not actually sending messages back and forth, but we are going to build an interface where we can see maybe a little header. And then when I think about a chat application, I think about kind of what you see on your phone, right? The messages that I send are going to show up on the right, and they're going to be one color. The messages that I receive are going to show up on the left, and they're going to be another color. And then down at the bottom, I need some way to be able to send a message, right? Type something in, hit the send button, and have that show up as a response. Well, we're going to need some CSS for that. We're going to need to style some of that, but we don't need to go out and find a template. We're going to practice with our CSS and revisit how we can build an interface, still maybe using Bootstrap, but create it from scratch. What we aren't going to do is tackle having multiple threads, being able to send messages to different people. All we're going to do to get started is just maybe some header that says, hey, this is a messages app, something in the center that's going to show all of the messages I've sent and I've received, and then something down at the bottom that allows us to type in a message, hit send, and have that show up in the messages back and forth. For whatever reason, Mac loves to autocorrect npm to nom, and I'm like, no, I'm not trying to eat something, npm. Okay, let's go ahead and dive on in. So first things first, I said we need some kind of header, right? So I come in here and I say, all right, we are going to make a little header. And in that header, I'm going to throw a class name on of text center. And in that header, I'm going to make an H1 that says my messages. So I save that. I come over here and I'm like, well, there's an H1. What happened to my text center? I use class name instead of class because we're in React, right? React is a little funky. It calls it class name instead of class. So I'm doing that right. But my text center isn't working. Where does my text center usually come from?
Bootstrap.
Bootstrap. But I haven't used Bootstrap in React yet. So there are two ways of doing it. There's a slightly more complicated way where we can actually install Bootstrap from NPM, then import Bootstrap in. But we're going to do it the slightly simpler way, and the way that we know to do it before, which is we go to getbootstrap.com, and blowing off some dust on some knowledge here, we go to the docs, we scroll down to number 2, and down in here is my little link tag, right? And my link tag is what I want to put in. And we know the link tag goes in the head. So I come over here and I'm like, well, shoot, I don't even have a body, let alone a head. Where am I supposed to stick this? Well, 99% of the time, all code we edit in React is going to go in the S or C folder because that's the source of our code. However, because we need access to the head, what we do is we go to the public folder and we open up index.html. And now all of a sudden we're looking at all of the stuff in here, and here is the body, and here's this div ID root. This is where the HTML actually connects into our React code. This is where React puts itself in. But if we scroll up a little bit, here is an entire head tag. So what I'm able to do is come down, doesn't really matter where in the head I put it, but I am able to paste in Bootstrap. And when I save that and head back to my React app, you should see my messages is centered. So again, getbootstrap.com, click on the docs, scroll down to number 2. In number 2, there is this link tag. I copy that link tag. I come over here. I paste that link tag in. Now I have installed Bootstrap into my into my React project. Because I have it in there, I can use this text center and I can see I've got my messages centered. Now that I've got my messages in there, I'm going to close out my index.html. Again, 99% of the time, unless you're working in the head tag for something in React, you do not want to be working in the public folder. You do not want to be putting script tags in that index.html. You do not want to be writing vanilla JavaScript. You want to be saying out of that index.html file unless you are putting something in the head. So I'm going to go ahead and close my index.html. Anyone not get my messages centered? Jenny, you want to share your screen? So can I see your app.js? You've got a class num. Good to go. Anyone else? All right, hopefully we're starting to check some questions off the list of, oh, I had that question of, I wonder how I get Bootstrap in here. Got that one done. Okay, now I move on. So I say, all right, what else do I need? Well, I need to build an interface for where all of my messages show up. And this is going to take a little bit of time, but that's okay, right? Because we want to figure out those message bubbles. We're going to kind of build that out from there. So I am going to make a new div, and let's throw an ID on that of messages. And in that, I want to kind of think about how these messages are going to show up. So I'm going to say, hey, every message is going to get its own div class name row. And in that row, let me think about it. If it's a message that I sent, it's going to be on the right side of the screen, right? And if it's a message I received, it's going to be on the left side of the screen. So if it is a message that I sent, it is going to have a div class name call2. And this is just a spacer. Why? Because I want to push the other side of that column over to the right side. So I'm going to add a new div class name, col 10, because what are we working with? We're working with 12 columns. 2 is going to kind of push it over. And then I want all of the text on this to be at the end, kind of right align the text, right? So we're pushing it over. And I'm going to say example message that I sent. So I save that, I come over, and what do I get? Example message that I sent. Shannon, you mean label closing divs? Okay. Yep, we can do that. So end of col 10 for message bubble. End of row. End of messages. And Natasha, was there a question that I missed? Okay.
No, you were saying that you covered Bootstrap being linked into React, and I said P had that question. I remember Palash asked about that.
Yes. I've got my chat on second monitor. So if you send a message and I ignore you, just come off mute and ask it. I normally have 2 giant 28-inch monitors and then the screen that I'm sharing, but looking over here, I'm not used to doing so. Anyone need a minute? Anyone not get their example message that I sent showing up?
Can you tell us again how you do that little trick with the messages? The green.
Oh, command / on a blank line for comments. Okay, so let's clean some of this up because this looks like crap right now, right? We want this to look like a message bubble. And right now it looks like text that is just about to fall off the page. So let's go into our app.css. If you have not cleared it out yet, you can definitely clear that out now. And let's see, let's start with the header because I want to separate out, the my messages here from the rest of the header from the rest of my messages. So I'm going to say border bottom, 1px solid, and I think black is going to be a little too dark. So I'm going to do CCC, which is like a nice light gray. I'm going to see what that looks like. Like, all right, that's good. But maybe let's throw some margin on the top of it so it doesn't feel like it's squished at the top of the page. And that pushes it down a little bit. Like, all right, feeling good about that. Now for my messages, I don't want the messages to be squished at the top. So I'm going to target my ID of messages, and I'm going to throw margin on the top of that of 15 pixels as well. So that gives me a little bit of breathing room. Feeling pretty good about that. And then I'm like, all right, I want to target the message text in here. But there's some other stuff that I might want to put into this message because I think I want to get the timestamp of the message to show up as well. So I'm going to add in one more div here with a class name of message text. And I'm going to put my message text right inside of that div. And I will say end of message text. Why am I using a class name here instead of an ID? Because I'm going to reuse this, right? There are going to be multiple messages. So because of that, I'm going to throw that in its own class, and that way I can create other divs in here. So I'm going to head back to my app.css, and I'm going to say my message text. And what's the most obvious thing? It's going to be a background color of blue. And I'm like, ew, that looks terrible. But before I abort on that idea, I'm going to keep on working with it a little bit. So I'm going to say, hey, my color of the text needs to be white. I'm like, okay, we're on a better track there. I am going to say my padding is going to be 7 pixels. And so now I'm getting a little bit more breathing room. I can throw a border radius onto it of 30 pixels. Now all of a sudden it's like, whoa, this is really starting to look like a message bubble. And I can also totally not cheat and look at code I've already written to figure out this. Make this, instead of the div, which is going to automatically take up a width, the full width of the column, instead, I'm going to make this a span. Because what's the difference between a div and a span? A div is full width, and a span is just going to act like text. It's only going to be as big as it needs to for the text that it's holding. And just like that, I have my first message. Okay, I know that was a lot of code. Quick review. We added a span around the text, example message. We added the class name of message text. Why did we put this span in here? Because there may be other things for this message that I want to put in. We also, in app.css, did some styling on the heading. We did some styling to create space for the messages. And then we created our first message with a background, a little color on it, some padding, and the border radius. Give you a minute to catch up on that. As always, if you have any questions, let me know. I'm gonna try and split my screen here. That might be a terrible idea. I don't know if that helps or not, but we'll give it a try. No, it was fast. I know it was a lot of code, but you should only panic if you don't understand it, not if you are not caught up.
Max, I have a question, not related to the code, but what was the thing called that you had us download that was in like our bar thing at the top, so like we could put like, I'm so bad at names. We could
Snapping the windows on the left and the right. It is called Rectangle, and I believe their website is rectangle.app.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone need a minute? Anyone not have their browser looking like this? Okay. So we've got this working, and I'm feeling pretty good about all of that. So I'm gonna say, all right, what else do I need here? I've got a message that I have sent. I probably need a message that we have received, right? So I'm going to head back to my app.js. And now I'm in div soup and I'm thanking Shannon for saying, can we label our divs? So I'm like, all right, I want another row to show up here. So I'm going to go to the end of my row and make a new div. And that is going to be a class name of row as well. And I'm going to say end of received row. And end of sent row in my comments, just so I can and I'm gonna try and spell received right. It is a word I spell wrong every single year. I am aware I have a problem with that word. Okay, so what does my received message look like? Well, if I have a call to spacer for my sent messages, you would think I would need a call to spacer for my received messages as well, right? So it looks like it's on either side of the screen. Well, what I can get away with is just putting this in a call 10. And technically I could put the spacer of the call 2 down here if I wanted to, but I don't need it because this 10 is going to constrain everything that I need. So I'm going to take that spacer out and say end of call 10 for received message. And then in here, I'm going to also put in my span of message text. And instead of example message that I sent, I'm going to say example message that I received. So I save that. I come over here and I'm like, okay, spacing is right. But what's going on here? This shouldn't be blue, right? This should probably be gray. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to head back to my HTML. And inside of the how do I do that? Inside of the message text here, I'm going to add a new class on there that says received message. And then I'm going to come over to the CSS and write a received message. And that is going to have a background color of light gray. And I save that and I'm like, okay, but what's wrong? That text shouldn't be white, right? That text should have a color of black. If anyone is out of breath because we just wrote a ton of code, do not worry. User interfaces are always a little clunky to build. CSS, though, if we think about everything we've learned so far, CSS seems pretty easy, right? At this point, we're just taking advantage of CSS and all that we're doing over here, other than class name instead of class, just good old fashioned HTML. This is what we should have so far. I will attempt to label things as important. Or, hey, I'm going to speed through this, but don't worry, it's basic stuff we're already doing. This is basic stuff we've already been doing. So we've got 2 more things to get done before the break, and then we will call it. So, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say I noticed that for the class name, you put received message next to message text.
Yes.
I'm just I'm trying to think. What I was gonna ask. I'm guessing you could put multiple classes in that class name, like with different names.
You can apply multiple classes to the same div. Just like we did up here with the class name call10 and text end. If you separate them with a space, you can apply as many classes as you want. Yes.
Okay, just making sure. Thanks.
Yeah, good question. And it's going to cascade over itself, right? So it's going to apply message text first. So message text is going to have these 4 things. And then because received message comes after message text, it's going to see that the background color and the color are different than the color and the background up here. So it's going to just cascade over it and basically override these 2 with these 2 properties, but it's still going to apply the border radius and the padding to it.
Can you do that only in React, or is it like?
Nope, you can do that in any regular HTML and CSS. Jen, I'm not even in the same time. I'm in a different time zone and in a different time universe. Why do you think I can code so fast? Time moves differently where I live. Loki might be behind me. You never know. Okay. So we've got all of this done. One thing that's really bugging me though, is these messages are like right up along the side. And while you may think, I'll just throw a little margin in there, or a little padding in there and call it a day, we've got a better solution for that. I'm going to go all the way up to my div class name app. And I'm going to say this entire app is going to be inside of a container. Because I throw that container in there, because of the bootstrap magic, now I've got this nice breathing room on either side. And if I crunch it way down, I still have a little bit of breathing room, but it's taking up the full width. And if I pull this out, now I'm feeling much better about how all of that is living. So just a simple little container up at the top there fixes that problem. And in what, 45 minutes, we were able to build almost an entire app interface. So give me a couple more minutes. What else do we have to do here? Well, we need to get our message input down here, and then we can get into the fun stuff, the React stuff. How do we dry out our code? What is drying out our code? Don't repeat yourself. Well, we're about to start repeating ourselves in a minute, and we've got a React solution around the corner. But one more thing I got to get you through. We've got to get an input to show up at the bottom, and we got to get a send button down here as well. So I'm going to head back in. I'm going to click on my div ID messages, and I'm going to follow that all the way down to my closing div here. We've got it labeled end of messages. So we need to be inside that final closing div, but outside of the second closing final div. So I'm going to come down here. I'm going to do my div ID. And on that div ID, I am going to give it a, we're actually going to make it, instead of a div, we're going to make it a form. And that form is going to say end of input form. And let's throw a class name on that of row. And so we can target it. Let's call it input bar. And inside there, we're going to throw an input. And it's going to be a type of text. And let's throw a class name on that of form control. That comes from Bootstrap. Form control is just going to style it out for us a little bit. And I can go ahead and make this a self-closing input. And I come back over here, and now I've got my input bar. Not where I want it, but I can type some text in there and it shows up. So I'm like, all right, that's good. I also want to throw in my button, and I'm going to use Bootstrap for BTN and BTN success. So it's green, and I'll say send. And I save that, and I'm like, ew, no, I want this send button over here. So we can say, let's throw this in a div class name of col10 and move my whole input into that. And then this I can put in a div class name of a col2 and throw that BT button in here. And now we get our send button where we want it to be and our message bar. Pausing there, giving you guys a second to catch up, and then we will finish off our interface. I know I'm going fast. I apologize for that. Probably going to get ripped a new one in the daily feedback form. It's okay, right? This is all HTML. This is all CSS. I'm going fast so we can get to the fun of the React stuff, the state, separate components, all of that stuff. Let me move this over because we didn't really write any CSS. This is one of the few times that I'm okay with you actually copying and pasting from the live share. If you are looking at your interface and it looks like Frankenstein had a stroke and just have things that are not aligning on your page or not looking like this, chances are you are missing a closing div, or you've got a form inside a div that should be outside a div or something like that. So this is one of the few situations where I will say, if it isn't looking quite right, feel free to copy and paste some of my code. That should fix a lot of the issues. We will be using State Alley instead of local storage because we don't really need to save the text that's getting sent. All we need to do is make whatever got typed in to show up in the interface. But we will be revisiting this project in a couple of weeks after we get introduced to the database and APIs. And we will actually make it so when messages get sent and received, they save into the database. And then when the page loads, it will load those messages out of the database. But for now, we're going to make it so when you click the send button, it sends into state. And that will work fine until you refresh the page. Jen, you want to share your screen?
No, I need to share my screen. I just wanted to ask, when I try to take the comment end of input form or like the end of the div and I put it outside of the div, it screwed up the whole screen.
Yeah, React doesn't like when you return things outside of the div. So if you move it inside the div, it should be okay.
Okay, it was just getting a little confusing to me because like the comment was before the div was even over. So I tried putting it in the outside and it blasted me with a red screen.
Yep. And we have not hooked up the send button to anything, right? So if I type ABC and hit the send button on this right now, nothing works. That's okay. Don't worry, we'll get to that.
Max, that feels so fraudulent. So misleading.
Wait, why is it sending though? Because we use that type of button, or
You mean because I have the word send in here?
no? Like, why is it taking the text? Because
it's an input type text.
Oh, okay.
All right, anyone need one more minute? We good? Okay. Last thing I want to fix in the interface, and then I promise we are done with interface. We will not go at this speed for the rest of the night. Important that we get this out of the way. Last thing that I'm noticing is this input is here. And that's really going to annoy me because every time that we get a new message, that input bar is going to get moved down, right? I would really like to anchor this input bar at the bottom of the screen. So we're going to get a little fancy. Instead of taking this input bar and putting it at the bottom of the screen, we really want to take these messages and make the messages be tall enough that it's going to push the input bar down to the bottom. But that's really hard because this may be a smaller window. So what do we want to do? We want to say that these messages should be 100% of the height of the screen. So to do that, what we do is we go back to our messages and we say the height of these messages is going to be 100 VH. So I save that, I come back over here and I've got my messages, I've got this, and I'm like, where did my VH, I'm sorry, stands for vertical height, vertical or viewport height. Stands for viewport height. Sorry, I had to think about that one. The viewport is basically the size of the window here. So not counting the toolbar, how tall is the viewport? We want it to be 100%. And I'm like, well, where did my input go? If we just made that 100%, if I scroll down the page, my input is down here. And I'm like, okay, that's not quite what I want, along the right lines, but I shouldn't have to scroll to see this. Well, it turns out that this is taking up some height, and it turns out that my messages is taking up some height. So I want it to be 100% minus the space that my messages takes minus what's down here. Well, I could play with it and I could say that it's going to be 80 VH. And now that looks right, but there's a gap down here. And if I shrink my window way up, down, now I still don't have enough room because it's percentage based. So I'm like, this isn't quite right either. Maybe we make it say that it is 100 VH, but calculate out 100 VH minus the height of this area in here minus the height of this text input. And I'm going to just guess that's magically 140 pixels. So I save that, I come over here, and my send bar is perfectly positioned. Okay, I didn't magically guess. I know that it's 140. How do I know it's 140? If I go into the inspect here and click on the header, I can scroll down to the bottom and see that the header is 50.5 pixels tall, plus the 15 pixels from the margin. So now we're at 50 plus 15. And then I go look at my messages bar down here, and I look at that, and that is another 37 plus the padding on, nope. What number does that add up to? That adds up to 102. So if we play around with this number here, that's basically the way we do it. Say 102, 102 still isn't quite big enough. It's still hanging off the screen. So we just fiddle with this number until we get it to the point where it looks right. So again, that height number is this div in here. We're adjusting this div to take up enough space to push the messages input far enough down. Does anyone have questions about that? Corwin, check your final form div. Make sure you've got a row on this. Make sure you've got a col 10 on this and a col 2 on this. And make sure your closing divs line up. Make sure your col 2 is not inside your call 10. If you're still having a problem, raise your hand and I can look at your screen. So this is the final interface that we are going for. Brandy, what's up?
Mine is doing the same thing that Corwin is, but all of my stuff looks like it lines up.
Liar. Go
My
ahead,
bad,
Shers.
my bad.
Oh, no. You while you're here, we'll get you fixed and then we'll come over to Brandy.
Okay.
Your call 2 is inside your call 10. So take one of the closing, so yeah, above that line 28, throw a closing div.
See, mine is not.
Closing. So open arrow. Oh, whoa. You got a V instead of a. There you go. And then take one of the divs out, like take line 32 out. And save. And did that fix the problem? Cool. All right, Brandy, you're up.
Oh, apparently never unmuted.
You're good. Form should have a class name of row, not a ID of row.
Oh, why did I put ID?
Oh. I don't want to get inside of your brain. I don't want to know the answer to that.
Brandy,
I don't either, but I don't have a choice. So
is that Shannon laughing in your background?
yes,
I love it. I love it.
it's all three of them. It's all three of them laughing in the
I
background,
should be there right now.
not just one.
Did that fix it, Brandy?
Yes, it did.
Cool. Anyone else need interface help? Pat yourself on the back. You just ran a marathon with me. You just built an entire interface in a ridiculous amount of time. And if it makes you feel any better, I could not make that from scratch in that amount of time. I've done this chat interface several times. Whenever you see me looking over here, I'm cheating and looking at code I've already written, right? So the important thing is that you understand the code. You wouldn't have to be able to create this from scratch. You wouldn't have to do this in an hour, let alone 3 hours, right? Like, don't worry about the speed of all of this. As long as you get how this is all connecting together, that's all that really matters. Okay. One little React nugget before we go on break, and then we will dive into the appiness of all of this, of getting this all to work. So I'm looking at, no, I'm not sharing my screen, so you're not looking at. Okay. I'm looking at all of this, and we just wrote 50 lines of code, right? We think, all right, that's not too bad, but this is really messy, right? My header is mixed in with my messages. I don't really know where my input bar starts and my messages end. Pause, do not follow me here. I'm just going to show you an example. Do not do this yourself. What if over time, I end up taking some messages and I end up sending a couple messages and receiving a couple messages? We look at our interface and there are a couple messages that I received and a couple messages that I sent. Ignore the styling for now. We'll fix that in a second. But now, just by having a couple messages I sent and received, I'm all the way at 100 lines of code. And what already was messy has now become even messier. And I'm like, ooh, I want to fix some of that. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to put it back to the way it was. I'm going to save, make sure I only have one of everything. And I'm going to start breaking some of this out. So even though my header is only a couple lines of code, I'm going to move that to its own file. This is something that we cannot do in vanilla HTML. This is something that we can only do because we are in React. So what am I going to do? I'm going to head over to my files, and inside my SRC, repeat after me. We do not use the go live because we're in React. We already know that one. That was last week. This week, when we create new components, they do not go in the chat folder directly. They must be inside SRC. So do not use this little new file button up here, because chances are it's going to create that not in the SRC folder and cause you problems. What we're going to do instead is inside SRC, we're going to right click on SRC, 2 fingers right click if you're on the trackpad, new file, and we are going to call that header.js. Must be a capital H. Do not get sloppy here. We are making our own component. Components that we make always have to be capital letters. So we're going to make a header capital H.js inside the SRC folder. We're going to hit enter to create that file. Now, just to be really paranoid, I'm going to collapse my SRC folder and make sure my header disappears. If you collapse the SRC folder and you still see the header hanging out here, you did not create that file in SRC and you need to drag it in. We cannot reference files outside of SRC in React. And I will personally reach through my camera and Batman slap you around if you have an error around having a component outside of the SRC folder. We are going to be creating lots and lots and lots of files. Because of that, we are going to make sure to make those files always in SRC. Okay, what goes in our header? Well, we're going to say const header, and it is a function. So we make a function like normal. We return, and what do we want to return? I'm going to go back to my app.js and cherry pick my entire header outside of my app.js. I am then going to head to my header.js, and I am going to return that entire header. I know this is confusing because I'm copying and pasting from files. It's okay. In my app.js, I cherry picked my whole header out of this. I took that header and I pasted it into the return of my JS here. Now, before I can use this header, I need to export it. So I'm going to make it the default thing that gets exported from this file. That's new syntax. We haven't seen that before. We're just taking this header that we just made here and exporting it here. If I can export it here, that means I can come back to my app.js and import my header from my header file. And if I can import it, that means that I can call it right here. And if all of that works, we should see my messages show up as normal. What did we do? We just made our first reusable component. That means we moved header into its own file. We made it a component by making this function, returning out some JSX. We have to export it so that we can import it. And now that we are importing it, we can use it right here. Try and football my way through this. And then we will go on break a full 5 minutes early. Okay, what's happening here? We start with this header. This header is in a file called header.js. In that, we are saying whenever we call header, this HTML is what's going to show up. Now we take this full header right here and we export it. We export it so that we can import it from the header file path, which is right over here, and we call that header. That header is what we use right here to make the component show up. One more time. Header.js. Header.js has a component called header. That header is going to always show this code. That header gets exported here. That export gets imported here. Header is linking to the header file that we created right here. We take that header, which is getting exported from here, and we use that header right here. Does anyone not see the connect the dot between that? Because none of us are football players that I know of. Professional football players, I should say. We good? We feel like we've earned break. We feel like we know I'm going to fry your brain on the second half of class for sure. So we're going to make sure we recharge and have some water. When we come back, we're going to get more practice. We're going to take this header that we made our own component, and we're going to make a component called messages list. And we are also going to make a component for our input bar down here. That's awaiting you after break. Go on break. Be back at 7:20. I'm letting you go a couple minutes early now. So be back at 7:20 and we will finish this out when you return.
Max, I have a question before you go.
Sure.
I just watched you do that. Now I go in and do that same thing.
Yes, you can do that.
Okay. And I looked for the rectangle dot app. I put that in the browser, right? And something should come up because it's not.
It should be an app that you install to your applications folder.
Okay.
All
right.
It's rectangleapp.com. And that should have a download button on it.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Shay, what's up?
Just curious on the name convention at app.js, you got import, and the first one was app.css, but when you did the header, you didn't add the header.js. Is there a difference, or is there a certain name we got to look for?
So the reason why we have to name app.css is going to like automatically apply everything that's in that CSS file to the classes down here. But we need to be able to give this a name so it matches up with whatever component we call it down here. So we could theoretically, not saying to do this, but theoretically, we could call this like top of page and call this top of page here. And this would still work the exact same way. It would show up here. So basically, we need to give this some, it's kind of like declaring a new variable. We're pulling this in from the file, but it wants to know what do we want to call this component that we're going to use down here, compared to the app.css, where it's like take everything in the CSS and just automatically apply it to the classes on the page. So that's why we have to give it a name here. We have to tell it, hey, what is the name of that component that we're pulling in?
All right, so it's basically the app.css is applying the entire file, where the header is just specifying exactly where we want. Okay, I got it.
Exactly. You got it. And over time, we could actually have multiple things being exported from a file, but we can only have one default thing being exported from a file. And whatever that default thing is what goes here without the curly braces around it.
Appreciate it.
And, yep, no problem. Rain, what's up?
Thank you, Max. I do understand that header is a component, it's a variable that can be named to anything that needs to contain my messages to appear on our main JS, which will be exported into the import. That's putting it down into the div so we can actually have it visualized on the page. I understand that.
Cool.
My thing is, when you do this, I try to type out what you're telling us rather than copy. And I noticed that mine's looking a little different than yours.
You want to share your screen?
Sure. So this is mine, like this is blue.
You are missing an equal on after header. On line 1, the word header, put an equal in there, and it should fix all the formatting before the parentheses.
Oh, I see what I missed. Okay, because I kept trying to do it myself.
There you go.
Awesome, thank you.
Quick fix. We like those. Flush.
Would you mind taking a quick look at my business card? I added a couple icons on there.
Go for it.
Okay.
Record. So what we want to keep in mind is normally we wouldn't put all of this code in one file, right? We would go, hold on, this seems like another section of code. This seems like something I can reuse over and over, right? So ideally, you just make a new file every time you make a component, and then you write the code right in there. However, oftentimes, we don't realize that we've made something that should be its own component until we've built the whole component, and then we go, oh, that's a lot of code. We should move that into its own file, right? And so that's the reason why I teach it like this. Ideally, we would make all of these files right out of the right from the get-go, and then not have to move all of this different code around. But because oftentimes we go back and refactor, I show you the refactoring steps, if that makes sense at all. So any questions pop up during the break before we dive back into our code?
I guess when you import from the files, you're supposed to put like the ./ every time, the ./ and like the file name.
Correct. Yeah. So the ./ is saying how to find the file. The dot is saying whatever file we are currently in, right? Whatever folder we're currently in. So because app.js is in the src folder, a dot is saying in the src folder, go find a file called header. When we start working with multiple folders, we may say / a folder name and then another / and then the name of the file. Or if we get several folder levels deep, we may say // which is saying go find the folder that this is in and go up one folder level. So those file paths are called relative file paths. Why is it relative? Because it is relative to whatever file you're in right now. So / means in the current folder, // means go up one folder level.
Okay, sounds good. I noticed that doesn't have the .js. Will it still work if you put the .js?
It will, and it's probably a little better to throw the .js in there. It is optional in React imports. It is not optional when we start importing files on the server. So probably a little bit better to be more specific and throw the .js in there, although in React, it will assume that you're looking for a JS file when you import. Good questions. Any other questions? Okay. So let's get a little bit more practice breaking these into their own components. So I am going to make a new file. And again, I'm not going to click on this new file icon up here. I'm going to right click on my src folder. I'm going to do a new file, and I'm going to call that file messages list.js. And in messages list, I'm going to throw this on the right side of my screen. I'm going to say const messages list equals a function that is going to return. And what is it going to return? It's going to return this entire div. So I'm taking everything out between header all the way down to my form. That's all the code that I'm taking, and I'm pasting that into where my return is. Now, this comment came over a little weirdly, right? And Jen, this was your point. when I have a comment outside of the div, it's like freaking out because we can only ever return one div or one HTML element from a component. So in React or in regular HTML, we could have a div and a div and a div and it would be no problem. In React, React only ever wants to return one div. Now we can put multiple divs inside that one div, but we can't return multiple divs out at that root level. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take this comment out and delete it because I think it's pretty clear it's the last div. It must go with this div messages. So I just delete out that last comment, and then I need to export my default messages list. Because we're exporting there, we can import our messages list from messages list.js, that file path. And then we can call our messages list right here. And if all of that works, our browser should look exactly the same.
I got a question too.
Shoot.
I know in HTML when we had like done the divs, we had like the shortcuts, so we could do like a call -4 and it'll make like a div element with a class call for. Is it like a similar process in React to do that or no?
That is called Emmet, EMMET, maybe T, maybe two T's. Emmet is the abbreviation system that lets you do like the .col-4 and hit enter and have it make the div for you. It does not work out of the box with JSX like it does for HTML in VS Code. However, if you search for Emmet for JSX, you on Google and maybe throw in VS Code there, there's probably an extension that you can install that will enable that for you.
It was good. Thanks.
Yep. All right. Last one we're going to do here. I'm going to close out of my messages list. I'm going to right click on my SRC folder. I'm going to make a new file. I'm going to call that message input.js. In my message input, I'm going to do a const message input is equal to a function that's going to return something out. What's going to return? It's going to return my entire form. Again, watch your comment. Make sure that you don't have a comment after the closing form tag. That's going to cause you some problems. We're going to export our default message input. And we are going to import our message import from our message input.js. And we're going to throw the message input in down here. And we should still have our input showing up in our browser. Once we have all three of those done, we have radically cleaned up our code. We now, in our app, have this very nice, lightweight 3 components that are making up the entire code that we're looking for. And if we go look, we can actually, on any of these imports, hold in the command key and click on the file path, and it will actually open that file for us directly. That's kind of nice because VS Code knows where to find these files. So if we command click on them, it will pop it open for me. So I'm going to give you guys a minute, just catch up, make sure you've got that good to go. And we will move on to our last refactor before we dive into making all of this work.
Max, I just have a question.
Shoot.
Never mind. I don't think I have it.
Never mind, don't shoot. Okay, last thing we need to do here. I'm going to head to my messages list, and I'm looking at my messages list, and I'm thinking, okay, this is really good, right? That we've got it broken up. My app is looking nice and clean. But if I'm looking at my messages list, I'm realizing I need to go one further level deeper, because I'm looking at this, and this entire hunk of code is representing a message that I sent. And this entire hunk of code is representing a message that I have received. But I'm going to need to be able to duplicate these, right? I need to have several received messages and several sent messages. But I don't know that I necessarily need to make them their own file. I could if I wanted to, but it's possible to go too file crazy, right? To have too many of these little files that only have snippets of code in them. So there is a way to make a component without making it an entirely different separate file. It is possible to have multiple components in the same file. What does that look like? Well, I'm going to come down here and I'm going to say const sent message equals a new function. And I'm going to return, what am I going to return? I'm going to take this entire div class row and paste it down into my sent message. Now, I don't need to export it because I'm not importing it on another file. I can use this sent message directly in my messages list. And I can do that same exact thing. I can take a const received message and return out my entire div and use that received message right here. Oh my God, I spelled received right. I'm so proud of myself. Oh, sorry, I'm not helping, am I? Okay, so we broke that down a little bit, right? Because we realized now we can take our sent message, and if we want, we can copy and paste this 5 times, and we get the flow that we are looking for. So I'm going to start a poll here because we only need 2 of these. You don't have to follow my example there. But I know there is a lot of code going on, right? So only vote in the poll if you are caught up. If you are caught up, go ahead and let me know. If you're still working on it, do not vote in the poll. And once we have the majority of people going, we will keep on moving on. Yes, Jen, this is like div soup with folders, but now we're like putting little bowls inside your big bowl of soup to like separate out the div soup. Lots of functions. I mean, I know all of you guys love JavaScript so much that like you just wanted to find more ways to love it even more. And I've just introduced you to React. Corwin, for your sent message, in your messages list, make sure that you're using both the sent message and the received message, because it's sent message is a function, right? So unless we call that function somewhere, it's not going to show up. So we're basically saying when we put the sent message here, we're saying take anything that's being returned from the div here and make it show up here. If you do have that sent message and it still isn't showing up, make sure your return looks right here. And if all of that looks right and you're still not seeing the sent message, raise your hand and we can take a look.
So I just have a
Thanks.
question about something.
Sequoia, go for it, and then Corwin, I'll come to you next.
You could go. His is probably more important than mine. Mine is just about colors or something. So you can go.
Oh, never mind. Go for it, Sequoia. He fixed it.
So I'm trying to figure out, like, in my apps.css, I changed like the one to another color and the other one another, but they both coming up the same color.
Sure, let's take a look. Jen, it's almost like after a couple days of suffering where like all of a sudden the power plant is back up and running and we're getting all the light bulbs. Okay, so I think this is a problem not in your CSS quota, but in your class names. So let me request remote. And I think the problem is if we, nope, that's mine, not gonna cheat. I am looking at messages list and the sent message. Nope, there goes that idea, never mind. Here we go. This has received message and it's singular, but this is received messages, it's plural. So if I take the S off of that, you are rocking and rolling.
Thank you.
No problem. Other questions? Very easy to get overwhelmed here, right? Because we're moving so much code around and we're jumping all between these files. But when you break it down into those concepts and go, all right, I'm just taking this chunk, I'm making it its own little return, and then I'm telling it where to use that chunk, this hopefully becomes a little bit easier. We good to keep going? Does anyone need another minute or have any questions? Okay, let's keep going then. So just take this feeling that you're really liking React and just hold on to that, because in 50 minutes, you won't be feeling that feeling anymore, because we are turning up the level of difficulty here a little bit. We need to figure out, hey, how do I make it so when I send a message here, it shows up here? That is going to take a full half a day to get done, and we don't even have half a day left. That is okay. We're going to work through a couple new React concepts here, right? State's coming back, your old friend, and we've got to deal with some props. Okay, what's going on with props? Well, I've got an example message that I sent here and an example message that I received here. Okay, well, if I go back to my messages list and copy this out a couple times, I get the same text over and over again. Props are the React concept that we can use kind of like parameters. Think of parameters and props pretty closely related, right? In fact, props is even a parameter in the function. So what if I want different text to show up here? Well, I can use a prop for that. So I can say the text of this message that I actually, you know what, let's call it content, like content even more. The content of this message that I would like to show up is first message. the content of this message I would like to show up is response to that. And the content of this is, I don't know, we're just going to put in some content here so we can play around. We're going to throw some stuff in there. 4 messages should be enough. So I'm going to add in that content. I save. I come over here, and all I have is example message, example message, example message. Well, there are 2 different ways we can use props. I'm going to show you both of them. The first way is on our set message. The first parameter that we get is this thing called props. These props are filled with whatever gets sent in when we use that component. And we can see that because we can console log out our props. And if we take a look in the console as to what our props are, we can see content, and the string coming through. It's just an object. Well, wait a second. We know how to use an object. If I go to this span, I can put in my curly braces. And because my curly braces are saying some JavaScript's coming my way, I can say props.content and see my content show up in my messages. Football, play this out. I take my content gets sent into my props. Through my props, I am able to access the content, which is showing me the message that I typed in. Any questions on that? We don't need this console log. This console log is just showing how it's working under the hood, but we can see that props is coming in as an object. Because of that, we are able to use dot notation to access that content.
Oh, I guess my question is, obviously we made the content, but let's say we made like other things too. Would all those show up as well?
Yes. So if we say like emoji equals, and we put in, I don't know, an onion, because apparently that's an emoji I use a lot. When I console log out the props and refresh, I can see that emoji onion, but only on this one, because I did not add it to this message. So when we see it over here, we can see that show up. And if we wanted to make that show up in like some div with the props.onion, we could see, I spelled onion right, or emoji, sorry, my bad. We can see that emoji show up there. But I'm going to take that out because that will probably confuse some people. Did that make sense, Jenny?
Yeah, that made sense. I was just wondering because I might probably use that in my capstone. Like,
yep.
Yes.
You will definitely use props in your capstone. Amberlyn, what's up? You're on mute if you're talking to us.
I'm sorry, I think I just figured it out. I think it changed my one word.
Okay.
No, I did not.
Okay. Go for it.
Okay. I just typed out those 2 things in the curly brackets. Looks exactly like yours, and it threw an error.
Okay. Sure, so let's take a look. Natasha, props usually is short for properties. In React, we only call them props, but if you want to think of them as properties, that's totally fine. You are missing a closing quote after the E in message.
Oh my gosh. Thank you.
No problem.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Anyone need one more minute? Okay. Corwin, you do? No, okay. Okay. Just like we can use props here, we can take it a step further. This is called object destructuring. Don't panic. That is a very fancy way of just saying we can break down the props by, instead of saying props right here, instead, we can tell it what props it's going to get by putting these curly braces in. What JavaScript is basically going to do for us is it's going to say, look inside the props object and pull out the name of the prop called content. Because we pulled out the content, instead of having to say props.content, what we are able to put right here is just the word content. This and this are exactly the same. Just by putting in these curly braces, we are able to access the content that we're passing in right here. So this syntax, just two different ways of doing it. This is a little shorthand. Either way, it will update our content to include this information. Any questions? I know that seems simple. You will run into React code that uses both of these. I don't really have a preference. I think when you're learning, this makes more sense because you know where that information is coming from. But as you get more advanced as a React developer, you know anything inside these curly braces is referencing something up here when you're calling the component. And so I do like this syntax a little bit more over time. But if this makes more sense to you, roll with this, that's totally fine. And it's, as you can see, it's fine to intermix them. Corwin and then Jen.
My sent messages have been like pancake this. Just
Share screen, let's take a look. Ooh, those don't look good, do they? Let me see your code. Row call 2. That is because you are missing the content inside your span. So if we throw in our props.content right here, does that fix the problem? There you go. All right, Jen, hopefully you're just as fast. Go for it.
How do you explain that props knows how to refer back to the content? Is that
that's like a React under the hood thing. React is always going to take what information is inside of here and is always going to pass that into the props right here.
Okay.
So that's just like a React syntax thing. You can think of it as these are HTML properties of key and a value, and the key is going to go into the object key here, and the value is also going to go into the props here.
Okay, I didn't know if there was like a reference somewhere that I was missing where you like called it props or whatever, but no.
No, and we can call this key whatever we want. Like content is not anything special. We could call this I don't know. And as long as we use that same thing down here, it will still work here.
Okay. Right,
So
right,
as long as we're consistent, as long as this is matching with this, you're good to go. And the same goes for this, right? We can call this whatever, but it's got to match with whatever's up here. Shannon.
So I just have a quick question because we're on line 26 where we've got received message and then it has content in it. The curly braces. Yeah, I just don't understand. Is that the second? I don't know. Can you explain that to me?
Yes. So
Thank you.
This and this kind of do the same exact thing. This props is an object. And we know it's an object because when we console log out the object, we can see content and the value, right? So because it's an object, we know we can use dot notation and say, well, go get me content. And so we're not surprised at all that when we have the content right here, it ends up showing up in here, right? Okay, now we take that a step further. These curly braces are saying, go break down this object and extract out whatever is in the content key and call that the variable content. So what we're basically doing is if we console log out our content here, we see that our content just logs out. What the curly braces are doing is they're saying destructure, go into this structured object called props and extract out the key called content and give that to me in a variable that we can use on our own. Yes, Jen, we don't really need to use the props. We can grab that key directly if we have these curly braces in here because we're destructuring it. We're just going in and instead of doing props.content and props.whatever other things are in there, we're saying go in there and pull out the content as if it is its own variable. Let me see. It does the dot notation for us. Yes. Let me just see if there is a good, sometimes, and this is a weird hack, if you go to Google and do like a visual, it can kind of help understand that. So like user are props. So instead of saying user.name and getting Alex, we can just put curly braces around it and say name, and name is going to contain the same thing as if user.name was over here. So we can say, you know, the props.content is exactly the same as putting this in curly braces and accessing the content directly. We could also say that as const content equals props. That is saying the same exact thing as saying content equals props dot content. These two, they're in red because I called them the same thing, but these two do the exact same thing, if that helps solidify it at all.
Yes, so we could use the key directly as long as we use curly braces.
You got it. Good, Shannon? Cool.
Thank you.
Actually, I'm going to leave that in there commented out because that may help when you're referencing it down the road. Yeah, I'll leave it there. Okay. Any other questions? Feeling good about all of this? All right. Find that difficulty dial and make sure you all leave fried before we leave tonight. All right, what's our goal? We've got all of this stuff showing up. All I want to do is come down here and say, I sent this, hit the send button, and have it show up here. Where do we start with that?
On click.
On click. And I'm going to modify that just a little bit and on submit, right? Because we want it to make it so when they either click the button or hit enter here, the message shows up. All right, well, first of all, I need to find where that's happening. It's not in my header. It's not in my messages list. It's in my message input. So I go to my message input.js, and I've already got a form here, and I've got my button. So on my button, I'm going to throw a type equals submit. And I'm also going to go to my form and say on submit equals send message. Well, where do I send the message? I've got to come outside of my return because send message is going to be some JavaScript stuff. And that because it is a submit, an on something, I get my event and I prevent default to prevent the refresh. And I save. And I come back over here and I say, I sent something. And I hit send, and it looks like nothing happened. How? Okay, Allie, you're already one step ahead of me. I need to get it to show up in the console, but I want the text that I've typed in here to show up in the console. What React concept do we need? Because it's information that gets displayed to the user. Use state. So I import my use state from React. 1, import it. 2, set it up. My inputted text, does inputted have two T's? No, I don't think so. Inputted text and my set inputted text equals my use state. And my use state is going to start as an empty string. When the page first loads, I don't want there to be any text in there. Step 2, set it up. Step 3, we need to connect my state to my input. My input right now is uncontrolled. What does uncontrolled mean? It means that the browser is keeping track of whatever gets typed in here. But we want to make it controlled. We want React to be able to control the value, and we want to connect that to state. In order to do that, we need to add 2 properties. The value, which is going to equal inputted text, and an onChange, which is going to take the event and set the inputted text to the event target value. God damn it, there are 2 T's in inputted. I shall fix it. Inputted, inputted, inputted. Inputted. Sorry. Every time I do this project, I go, I'm not going to call it received message. I'm going to call it something that I can spell. And now I go spell inputted wrong. And all I'm going to do to make sure this is working is come over here and console log out my inputted text. Brandy, you were like 3 steps ahead, and we're going to get to that. So everything that we send, we are going to send as a sent message, and then we'll see how we can fake it to make a received message show up. But some people do take this and they split their send button to make it look like whatever they type in shows up as a received message. So they've got like 2 different button types. You can do that if you want down the road. Okay, so I come over here. I type in ABC. No, apparently I can't type. I hit send and I see ABC here. If you cannot see ABC here after you think you've got all your code done, raise your hand.
So I have a question.
Shoot.
Should we have an error message?
The error message is probably lingering from an old error. Refresh the screen, and if you still have an error message, that's something you should fix. But if it goes away with the refresh, that means we already fixed it.
Yeah, it's gone. Thank you.
question.
Shoot.
We use event.prevent default every time we are using an on submit event, right?
Correct. Yep.
Does it work on change too, like, or on
You
click
do-
on submit button, because that will also be on submit in a way?
Yeah, because the button type is submit, it knows to trigger the form submission instead of an on click. So the on click is kind of covered by that event prevent default. You don't need it on change, however, because there is no default event that happens on change of an input. So it's only the default action of a form submission that we need to prevent the default on.
Thank you.
Yeah. Good. Okay. So I've got my inputted text. I have it in state. I'm feeling good about all of that. And I'm like, okay, we got message input here. And we've got our messages list here. And this is where it needs to show up. And I'm like, well, how do I get stuff here to actually show up in here? Does anyone have any guesses? Components, yes, we need to pass the information between components. So let's expand on that idea a little bit more. In our app.js, this is what we call our parent component. These are our 3 child components. And then if we think about our child components inside messages list, we have more children inside the messages list. So it's almost like this sent message is the grandparent of the app, right? We have parent, which is what contains it, and we have our or our children in here. What we end up, yes, parents are the imports and children are what we use in the return. Yes, that's a good way of putting it, Natasha. So we need some way to keep track of things in the parent and then send them down into the children. What do we know in React that can send information into a component? How do we send, not state, Natasha, how do we send information into a component? How do we do that? Props. We take our messages list, we add some prop in here. This is in the parent messages list, and we're sending it into the child of sent message in through the props. So we need props, but what else do we know when we have content that we need to display to the user? What do we use? State. So we need to combine both props and state. Does anyone have smoke coming out of their ears yet, or do we have to wait to see how we do that? What we're going to do is we are going to keep track of our messages up here in app. We are going to say const messages and set messages is going to equal use state. Because we are using state, we also need to import use state from React. Now we need to think about what our messages are going to look like in state. We are keeping track of multiple messages. Because we're keeping track of multiple messages, what data type do we think of?
An array.
An array. So we're going to put an array in our use state. Then we need to keep track of multiple pieces of information about each message. Because of that, what data type are we thinking of? Loop we will get to in 1 second, Allie. A loop is how we're going to deal with the array, but for each message, we're keeping track of multiple pieces of information. So yes, we're going to make it an object. Now, what pieces of information are we keeping track of? We're keeping track of the content. And we're keeping track of whether or not this is a sent message. Oh, I'm going to make that true. So that means that if I put in another message, we are going to make that sent false. Now, I need to connect all of this. So I'm looking over here and I've got stuff showing up here. I've got my message input here, and I know, I'm sorry, my messages list here, and my messages list is having all of this content show up. I need to send the messages here down into my messages list. Because I'm sending it into the messages list, we said we can send from the parent down to the child using props. Messages is equal to my messages. If I am sending the prop messages, I can head to my messages list and tell it you are going to get a prop called messages. If we're getting our messages, we can go to our messages, and because our messages are an array, which we see right here, we can map over them, which is a loop. That loop is going to give us access to each individual message. And if that message is a sent message, we are going to return the sent message with the content of the message.content. Else, we are going to return a received message with the content of also the message.content. And now we can delete out our dummy content here. I'm going to save there. I'm going to come over here. We get an error in the console. That's okay. But up here, I see hello out there and hello from the other side. I must have cried 1,000 times. The good news is we are stopping here for the day. The bad news is you are not getting out 19 minutes early. I'm going to use the rest of the class to go through and follow this all the way. If you want, take 2 minutes to start sobbing uncontrollably or to catch up on your code, and then we will go through all of this stuff. And I'm going to split my screen here. So hopefully you can see what I've got going on. Allie, I'm going to try and I don't know, would it be more helpful to do the visual first and then the comments, or the comments first and then the visual? Okay, we'll start with visual and then we'll do the comments. And if I run out of time, I'll comment and we'll go through it at the beginning of class tomorrow. To jump to the file, there are two ways of doing it. Hold in command and either click on the file name here or click on the component down here and it should open the file for you in a new tab. So command and then click on it, and that's what turns it kind of into a hyperlink. One more minute to catch up here. If you are trying to follow along and you think your code should be working and it is not working, raise your hand. I want to get everyone caught up as much as possible before we go through an explanation. And I will have a copy of this code tomorrow. So if you are desperately behind but want to try and follow along tomorrow, that is totally fine. You can start with my code tomorrow. Mo.
I was cool. I messed up somewhere along the way. I thought I found my way back, and then I didn't. So I got to share my screen.
Go for it.
All right, so I was cool, but my bubbles disappeared.
Okay.
When we started like the message input stuff, and I kind of
Yeah, I think you're on the right track. Let me take a look. So we have our messages here in our use state that we've got set up. So what we do is we need to send our messages into the messages list. Then we go to our messages list and tell it that it is going to get the messages. And then in the messages, what we end up doing is mapping over the messages. Oh, not maps, map over the messages. And if the message is sent, then return the sent message with the content of message.content. And otherwise return else. Return the received message with the content of message.content. And this should say message. And we can take these out. And I don't know, message.
You spelled message wrong.
Thank you. Okay. That did not help at all, but I think that is only because row, col 10, message text, received message. Here we go. You are just missing your import of your app.css.
Okay.
It's on the right track. Sent, true, false, message list. If message dot sent, there you go. Shakota, go for it.
Can I share my screen? I have a warning.
Go for it. Oh, is it the key is missing?
It says set messages.
Is not used. That's okay. We're gonna fix that tomorrow.
Okay.
Anyone else attempt to get it working and not get it working and want to share their screen before we go through an explanation? Okay.
Wait.
Oh, Amberlyn.
If we my
Corwin, I'll come to you next.
Hello. Can I share my screen, please?
Go for it.
Okay. And I have a child on my lap, so I apologize if she starts crying.
Not a problem.
Thank you. Share my screen. There's.
Okay. Normally I go to, let me request. App.js line 14. So let me go app.js here. And it is mad about line 14 because this is supposed to be a parenthesis.
Mom, what's her name?
And then messages list
And what's her
over
name?
here and go to messages
What's
is
her
what we map
name?
over. And then message input has an issue. Export default message input.
Here, I need this for one.
Opening curly. Why do I think it's mad about closing curly, semicolon,
Sorry, I got lost in the middle.
parsing input and export might only appear at the top level. What in?
Yeah.
I feel like I'm missing something dumb. Turn, form, div, input, closing, div, form.
That submit says submit.
Oh, on the button.
Yep.
Oh, I wish that was causing the issue. Parsing error, import and export, received mess. All right, I know I can fix this one, and then I'm gonna give myself 30 seconds to fix the other one. Received, you pulled a max and spelled it wrong. And then it's just your message input is angry at you, and it's gonna be something like if I just take that whole thing out. Unexpected token.
I want to open this. Like, I want to see. Oh, we don't open this. Sorry, it'll make a mess. No, I just want to see them, and then I put that top in. No, that. Spinning one.
It's gotta be const message input. Nell, am I missing something dumb here? Message. Default. I'm missing something dumb here. Amberlyn, can I come back to you at the end of class just
Yeah,
so
no
I
problem.
can read through the code?
problem.
It's gonna be a stupid syntax thing. But it's like
I think there's two send message events.
oh, good call. Very good call.
Okay. Good job. Thank
And
you.
now I just need to put that export back in and you should be back in business.
Okay.
Way to go, Allie. Good work.
Thank you.
Cool. You should be back in business.
Yes, it's working.
Okay. Let's explain through this code. And then if anyone needs help after class, I am more than happy to try and unfry your brains. Okay. So we start at, let me get my window expanded as much as possible. And to be clear, we don't have our input working yet. And we've got this nasty warning about a key property, and we've got stuff in here that's not working yet. That's okay. We're not done this project yet. We still have miles to go before we sleep.
It's gonna get up.
So because of that, we've got some more work to do here. All we did is get the data in state to pass through messages list and show up sent or received. Let's talk about how that works. We start. No, go away. There we go. Okay. We start with our use state. Our use state is coming in from React. We take that use state and we use it right here. Our use state is just the data that we want to display to the end user. We make it in an array, and we know it's an array because we're keeping track of multiple pieces of information. We've got a list of items we want to keep track of. We close that array off in here. Inside that array, we make two objects. Those objects contain two keys: content, which is the message text that should show up, and whether or not that message was sent. All of this information, all of this in here gets stored into the messages variable. Messages is a state variable that is containing an array of objects that have two keys of content and sent and the values of the message text and true or false. Pausing. Any questions so far? Okay, so we take these messages, but the problem is we want these messages to show up in messages list. They're hanging out up at the app level. So we take these messages and we send them in via a property. We call that property messages. So messages get sent into messages, and because it is a prop on messages list, messages here get sent into the, did not have that scrolled right, into, no. Okay, this will work. The message is here. Oh, so these messages are getting, come on. Getting sent into these messages right here. Those messages are used in our HTML here, and we map over them. The map is just looping over each message here. So the first time this map runs, this message is equal to this object right here. This object is going to be in my message. We take that message and say if this message, which is looking again over here, is it a sent message? Sent is true. Because of that, we are going to return a sent message. This is our sent message component down here. We take the message content, which is referring to this content right here, and we pass that in to the content prop down here. From those props, we are able to extract out the content. That means that the final content over here is trickling through the props, from the props to the props here, from the content coming from the message which is coming from the map which is looping over the messages which are coming in as a prop, the prop which is on messages list, the messages list which is referencing the messages which are coming from state, the state which is getting set as an array, and that content which is hello out there, which is getting sent all through this crazy thing all the way to our span down here. Okay, I'm done 3 minutes early. Goodbye.
No, wait. Explain to me again why we're doing the true and false.
Here.
Yep.
Because I want to be able to control whether a sent message shows up or a received message shows up. And so we use this sent true, and if the message is sent, we show the sent message component. But if sent is false, like it is on this one, we show received message instead.
Okay. Thank you.
Good question. Palash.
In your app.js on line number 18, is it possible to like change either of those messages word to something else? So it kind of like
Yes,
clears
it
up
is.
a little more.
This one we cannot change because it's referencing the state. This one we could say as like to display. And then if we call it to display over here, we have to match the to display here. And if we do that, it works exactly the same. So our property name does not have to match our property value. However, it is considered better form to keep this consistent so that you're not losing track of where that value is coming from. So I'm going to put that back. But you are correct in that we can change that. And Corwin, you are correct. After all of this work, our send button is still not working, but we're going to tackle that first thing tomorrow. I see a lot of smoke coming out of your ears right now. That is okay. You're going to start with a review of this tomorrow before we dive in to anything else. We are passing state through properties, which we're mapping over an array from the state, which is containing an object, and we are using that object to send additional properties down to our children components, which we are then showing in the span. Palash, how do you think I got through the second half of class?
Y'all be killing me.
I'm kidding. I am in California though, so when in Rome.
That's still on record.
I didn't say what I was doing. The chat doesn't show up on YouTube.
Oh yeah, that's right. Refer
Look,
to chat.
I was like, you acting fed, chill.
All right. Any questions? Are we ready to get out of here? All right. Have a good evening, everyone. Don't worry. We will start with a review tomorrow. This is the hardest part of React. Understanding children passing state is the hardest concept of all of React. Everything from here is a cakewalk, and we've got more practice with this tomorrow. And we also have an entire blog project where we get more practice with this as well. So don't worry, we will get this. Don't worry that you're fried. This is a tough concept. This is the hardest concept of React. We will review it tomorrow and dive in from there. Have a good night, everyone. I'll see you tomorrow.